and honorable members of ICHR. I would like to thank our chairman for this kind of programs, academic programs. ICHR always encourages a platform where we can have a debate and discussions on any issues of Indian history. This is a program in the series of lecture series program. So on behalf of ICHR, I welcome you, sir. Our guest of the today's program, Prakash Shah, sir. He has come from London. So for this, only for the lecture program, he has made a lot of efforts to give a different version of his studies. And also I welcome our chairman and I request him to preside over the function. I also welcome our members of ICHR, Professor Mukherjee sir, Professor Sai sir, and eminent historians from Delhi University and others. So on behalf of ICHR, I welcome all of you. I request our member, Professor Mukherjee sir, to introduce the guest.
Thank you, Dr. Aruni. Professor Rao, Honorable Chairman of ICHR, a distinguished visitor, Dr. Prakash Shah, Honorable Sachidanand Sahaji, and friends from ICHR, colleagues from ICHR, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. We are very happy to welcome Dr. Prakash Shah to today's program at ICHR. He normally doesn't give an introduction, but then he told me that he doesn't come to Delhi very often. Probably Delhi is not very academically sound. He travels mostly in South, and he travels, of course, all over America and Europe. Just briefly, yet to complete a formality, he has done his schooling in Kenya and England. He did his master's from London School of Economics and PhD from School of Oriental and African Studies, London, and has been teaching at the Reader in Culture and Law and director of the Center for Culture and Law at Queen Mary's University of London. And when he sent me his list of publication, I was very amazed. It's an amazing, impressive list of publications, both in terms of books and articles that he has written over the years, and that too at a very young age. He has been interested in the operation of refugee law in Britain. I think that was the first subject of his first book. And because he's basically interested in migration law, and England has been a country which has been hosting refugees from all over the world for a long time, since the Anglo-Saxon times. Then he moved on to another related area, which is often the consequence of the movement of refugees. That's a cultural diversity. And then he has also written quite a few books. I'm not giving you a list of books and articles he has written so far. For some time he has been engaged in doing a very wonderful work, which is a kind of refutation of the law which the British government had passed, anti-discrimination law, which was enacted in 2010, but fortunately not yet implemented, which is unfortunately using the concept of caste, which is a very different orientation all in India, for a very different purpose actually. And this will have a very dysfunctional effect on the relations between the British government and Indian society, and also create unnecessary fissures in the Indian diaspora there. Right now he has been co-editing a book on this family, religion and law, and he has few articles in his ideas. Of late, last few days he has been visiting various centers in India, talking to students of law in Calcutta, Hyderabad, and Bangalore. And he said he's thrilled at the prospect of talking to historians. I don't know what kind of impressions we leave on him. So with these few words, I will hand over the mic to Dr. Shah. Fine. Subject, I don't need to talk about that. You're going to speak on that. Then our chairman will say a few words. So I think these words are going. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Prakash.
Welcome. Please welcome Dr. Prakash Shah.
Formality.
फोटो में एक ही दिखता है
बस इतने से आपको आना चाहिए
अपने अपने में क्या
Mr. Chairman, Dr. Mukherjee, Aruniji, distinguished academics, members of the ICHR, colleagues, students, and hopefully in future some friends as well.
Surely all.
Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much to the ICHR for your invitation. And of course, as Dr. Mukherjee said, I do look forward to speaking to you. I assume most of you are historians, but even if you're not, it's okay. We can have a good discussion. I think you already anticipate that I'm going to talk about the caste system. And my mission today is really partly a kind of marketing mission, because I've been working on a book on the caste system together with a team of other scholars. I'm only one of the co-editors of the book. I have 3 other co-editors. And our book is titled The Western Foundations of the Caste System. It hasn't been published yet, so it's a kind of forewarning, that something is about to happen. A storm will take place soon, or maybe just a storm in a teacup, we'll see, right? So as I'm saying, my mission is really to talk to you about this book, the reasons for writing it, or at least being involved in a collaborative project with a group of people who are working in the same research program, and to interrogate the problem of the caste system in a new light. This is not my first venture to start to think and write on the subject of caste. So I'll do a bit of advertising for a book which has already been published late last year in 2015, where I've written a case against caste in British law, as the title already tells you. And this is part of the campaign that myself and a number of other people in the United Kingdom, mainly representing different segments of the Indian communities, the Hindu community, Jains, Sikhs, have been engaged in fighting a battle against this provision, as Dr. Mukherjee already said, in which carries a reference to caste in the Equality Act of 2010. And when the time is right, I'll say a little bit more about this. But being engaged in the campaign and also being forced almost to, as a lawyer, to begin to investigate the problem of the caste system, which you might say is a sociological problem, maybe perhaps a historical problem as well, led me into the new dimensions, previously undiscovered dimensions. But of course, I had already been previously interested in the question of religion, and perhaps being an Indian background myself, I took a keen interest in the kind of Indian religious background, if you like, and was more or less aware that the problem of caste is linked to the problem of religion in India, right? Or has been linked, as we'll discover. So this is part of the kind of background which led me to investigate this problem in a sort of deeper sense, if you like. And that journey of investigation is still ongoing. Yeah, of course, even in our forthcoming book is not going to be the last word on this, but it will be a step in a new direction in research on caste, hopefully, right? And hopefully will provoke new studies, perhaps some reactions and so on. So what are the background and main themes that I want to talk to you about? I already mentioned my involvement in this campaign, which inspired my own research on caste and my collaboration with a group of research scholars who've been engaged in the research program of Dr. S.N. Balagangadhara, who I believe, of course, has given a previous Azad Memorial lecture in this very forum. One of the issues that Balagangadhara's research program invites us to consider is not only the question of religion and, as he spoke to you about history, but also the question of the caste system. Right? And we believe that there is some very fruitful potential for expansion and pursuing the kind of research direction in which he's pointing to examine, which can lead to a fruitful examination of the problem of the caste system. Now, the title of the lecture to you today is called The Foundations of the Caste System. I have to admit it's slightly misleading, right? First of all, I'm not really interested in investigating the foundations of the caste system in the sense that it corresponds to some aspect of the reality of Indian culture and society today. Rather, what I should have said I'm talking about is the idea of the caste system, right? So, in a sense, I'm interested in the foundations of the idea of the caste system. This is the problem that we are investigating. And in fact, our book project is really investigating this. And secondly, of course, the references to Western. Now, I dropped that out, right? Because I thought more people will come if I just say foundations of the caste system. If I say Western foundations of the caste system, it might be a little bit off-putting. So, I can now reveal to you that the issue that I'm trying to really interrogate is the question of the Western foundations of the caste system. Now, when we say Western, of course, it has a deep connection to the problem of Orientalism. Right? Now, when you look at Edward Said's book on Orientalism, which I suppose many of you are already aware of, right? Edward Said's book starts off somewhere around the perhaps the late 18th, early 19th century, right? Investigating the problem of colonial Egypt, right? That's his point of departure. So you see that his project is very much linked to the project of colonialism, right? Which is the outright domination of certain territories in the non-Western world by various representatives of the Western world and different sovereign powers of the Western world. But of course, Said would be the first person to admit, as he does in his book, that the Orientalism that he's talking about is actually founded on much earlier layers of Orientalism, right? So in that sense, actually, Orientalism, we can say, both precedes the colonial project, which is the project of outright domination of different spheres in the non-Western world, different geographical cultural spheres in the non-Western world. So it predates that project of colonialism, and it also postdates that project, right? So it's actually possible to say, as actually Edward Said said as well, that there are contemporary forms of Orientalism. Before he passed away, he was quite open about arguing the case for the existence of American Orientalism, which we can refer to today. They don't call it Orientalism, they call it area studies, right? But it's another version of Orientalism. And of course, many other people have written about this. So our frame is going to be much larger than the colonial frame. I think that's what I want to flag to you, first of all, by introducing the problem of Orientalism. Secondly, of course, we know already from Edward Said that Orientalism can be looked upon as a cultural project. In what sense is it a cultural project? Now, Edward Said is not always that transparent about what he means by this, right? But one of the things he does hint at, right, consciously or unconsciously, but he writes about it, so one can say that he's conscious of it, is that Orientalism represents something about the way the West has experienced the non-Western world. Right? So in that sense, it tells us something about Western culture itself, right? Now, of course, where Edward Said's kind of diverts from our research program is that Edward Said then claims that it's possible to correct Orientalism. How can you correct Orientalism? Well, by doing better social science, right? That's how you can correct it. So this is one of the issues that I want to kind of indirectly apply to the problem of caste and the caste system, right? Because my presentation will raise the question whether or not it is possible to simply do better social science with respect to India in this case, and try to have better studies of the caste system, right, or at least of caste, right? Can we achieve that? So that's going to be one of the questions, and that's why I want to just introduce the problem to you. But I will announce the hypothesis. One of the hypotheses that I would advocate is that since we say that one cannot correct Orientalism, right? The implication of that already should be transparent to you, which is that one cannot correct the idea of a caste system as long as one sees or one regards the idea of the caste system as part and parcel of the Orientalist project. Right? So if caste system or the idea of the caste system is part of Orientalism, and if one cannot correct Orientalism by doing better social sciences, then you cannot correct the idea of the caste system either. Right? You either accept it or you discard it. That's it. Right? So that's going to be one of the problems that we're going to grapple with, and we'll see what happens to that. And in this sense, of course, the last bullet point should tell you that this very problem of accepting or rejecting elements of Orientalist knowledge is actually one of the major dilemmas or problems for the entire post-colonial project. Right? After Orientalism, what will a post-Orientalism actually look like? That's actually one of the questions that we need to answer. So the issue that I'm talking about to you today is really mainly a subset of the larger problem of what that we face, right, in the post-colonial context, and as I hope you don't mind if I say we are all post-colonial scholars in that sense, right? So I don't mean it as a term of abuse, at least not here. Maybe sometimes in the coffee room I might say it as a term of abuse. Now, when we meet the problem of caste, we of course have this grand assumption of the existence of the caste system in India, right? And this is one of the things that I want to expose in a way, right? Now, when you look at the way in which the caste system is described, right, both in older scholarship and in contemporary scholarship, you'll see that it contains many ingredients. So some of the ingredients you can say, right, there is the existence of a hierarchy, there is the existence of violence, there are rules such as the rules on commensality or dining together, there are rules on endogamy, whether or not one can marry outside of one's group, let's say maybe a jati group, there are issues of ritual purity, right? There is the question of untouchability, and so on and so forth. So you can have a whole listing of different ingredients. Now, when you look at the contemporary scholarship on caste, what do you see? One of the things you'll notice is that there's no consensus on which of these ingredients is either a necessary or adequate, right, component of caste. So, do we exhaust caste if we list all of this? The composition of a caste system, if we list all of this, are only some of them enough? If so, which ones? Right? Do we just have a shopping list approach? In fact, some scholars even say, right, some prominent scholars on the issue of caste say, well, you can have just any combination of them, and you will have satisfied the requirement of the existence of caste system. So, at the heart of contemporary scholarship on the caste system, you have a deep ambiguity. We actually cannot say with clarity what a caste system is, right? And certainly we cannot say with any clarity what the Indian caste system is. However, we also don't know whether these are constituent elements, as I said, necessary elements, and which ones of these are the consequences of the caste system. Right? Which of these are essential elements of the caste system, and which ones of them are an outcome of a pre-existing caste system, right? Something that already exists. For example, violence, right? Do I need to say that violence is an integral element of the caste system, or do I need to say that it's an outcome of something that already exists as a caste system? We don't know. Today we can't answer this question with any degree of clarity, right? So what we are saying is that there is an added layers and layers of ambiguity about what the nature of the caste system is. Also, you will have this kind of ambiguity about the origins of the caste system, right? What are its origins? Where does it lay, right? How far back does it go? What is it constituted by? And one of the key assumptions, however, right? So there is, as I said earlier, there is a certainty about the existence of such a thing as the caste system, and it's not any old caste system; it's the Indian caste system. It seems as if no other country in the world or culture in the world actually possesses a caste system, right? So it's actually a unique feature of Indian culture and society. That's one element, and that it's a pan-Indian system. Right? Now, one of the things that gives it away is that why it's a pan-Indian system is that we normally talk about the caste system in the singular. We say it's the caste system or a caste system, right? We don't say it's a series of caste systems. Of course, there is beginnings of scholarship on that as well, so you might criticize me about that. But the intuitive dimension, right, of the existence of a caste system actually entails the assumption that here is a pan-Indian caste system. Now, you may or may not be surprised to know that in the 19th century, even European scholars were disagreeing about even the possibility that in the kind of culture that they saw in India, a pan-Indian caste system could ever have arisen. Right? They actually had real debates about that, right? In English journals, certainly in English language journals, right? It was a live question for research, right? Because people were saying, well, how could it have been that, this alleged priestly class exercises its influence up and down, the length and breadth of this subcontinent, right? Without the existence of a centralized state, with such a diversity in cultures, in such a diversity in languages, how is it possible that a single alleged priestly class can exercise its influence over the length and breadth of this subcontinent to such a degree that it can introduce a singular caste system throughout, right? Throughout this culture. They used to ask that question with a great deal of seriousness. Today we don't ask that question, right? We don't ask that question. Today the issue is really taken for granted that there is the existence of a pan-Indian caste system. Of course, the other correlative assumption is that there is an oppression. Right? Generally, you see that scholars are agreed on these things. Right? There is an Indian caste system, and it's oppressive. Everything else is up for grabs. So there's ambiguity and certainty at the same time. Now, in a sense, our task is to inquire why is there certainty despite all the ambiguities. Right? If we can not really say for certain what comprises the caste system, what makes it the caste system it is, why is there that equal amount of certainty, right? That it really exists, right? And it exists up and down India, right? That is a kind of uniformly existing system. So what we do in our book is that, first of all, we have a number of chapters, 3 to be precise, where we pick up a series of different, let's say, segments, right, or domains, where we try to expose the existence of anomalies, right? If you carry through let's say, talk about caste, the writing about caste, the allegation that there exists a caste system in India, across different domains, what you'll see very much coming up very soon is a series of anomalies, right? In other words, now, of course, in scientific theory or in the history, in the philosophy of science, you'll notice that whenever a theory throws up anomalies, you need to correct that theory, right? By introducing adequate explanations which meet the existence of anomalies. Now, what happens in caste studies research is that doesn't happen. You still get a parallel set of assumptions, right? Going on at the same time, right? Some of which try to combat the existence of anomalies, other writers simply existing in blissful ignorance, right, of the existence of those anomalies. Now, so for example, if you look at the chapter by Bala Gangadhara, he talks about the idea of social justice, right? Because he claims that today, if you look at some judges, most intellectuals, and all Ambedkarites, you'll notice that they say that the justification for reservations is grounded in the idea of social justice. So the drafters of the Indian Constitution were motivated by the idea of social justice when they put into place the basic framework for the enactment of reservations based on caste. Yeah? Actually, he goes on to show that, first of all, the idea of social justice wasn't in the minds of the drafters of the Constitution, right? Certainly, it wasn't there as a normative idea, as a moral idea. It wasn't there. right? For it to have been present as a normative and moral idea of social justice, it would have presupposed the existence of Christian and Catholic social morality. Not only the existence, but the idea, or it would have presupposed that members of the Constituent Assembly would have had access to those ideas, right? In other words, ideas of Catholic social morality, which would have carried a kind of normative or moral weight. And he clearly shows in his chapter that no such imputation can be made. Right? First of all, most of these guys, anyway, the overwhelming majority of them who spoke in favor of reservations, were not Christian. Right? We also don't know whether the idea of the social... Well, actually we know, because Balagangadhara's chapter says so, right? That the popularization of the idea of social justice, although part of Catholic social doctrine since the 19th century, actually doesn't take off until well into the second half of the 20th century. So there's no way that members of the Constituent Assembly would have had access to these ideas, right? Whether or not they were themselves directly Christian, or whether they were of another background. If you look at the second chapter, second substantive chapter in the book, you'll see it deals with the problem of caste violence. That chapter is by Dunkin Jalki and Sufiya Pathan. Now, what these writers argue is that, first of all, we don't know what caste violence constitutes of. Right? The authors, when you look at the soft data, if you like, yeah, on caste violence, it can compose any number of things, right? Some of which I provided in the list on the previous slide, right? So, what exactly? Yeah, is untouchability a form of caste violence or a caste atrocity? Right? Is actual physical assault a form of caste violence or atrocity, etc., etc. So you've got a number of ambiguities there. More seriously, however, they go into the statistical picture, right? The official statistical picture, which is produced in the crime records, right? The official crime records which exist in India. And what you see is that there is a recording system for caste-based violence, which only refers to SCs and STs, by the way, so scheduled tribes and scheduled castes. But the statistics don't just record the experience of violence by members of those groups, SCs and STs, which is meted out to them by members of other groups. They also record violence, or atrocities, whatever, which may be consequent to some kind of problem between members of those groups. Right? So you could be in the very same jati, and you could have an act of violence against you, and that would be considered to be a caste atrocity for the purpose of the official figures in India, the crime records in India. The third level is even more interesting. When you analyze even this rather loaded statistic of caste-based violence, you realize that even if you take into account the experience of atrocities by SCs and STs, whether it's by members of other groups or by members of their own groups, you realize that actually there is a disproportionately less experience of atrocities and violence by members of these groups than members of other groups. Right? If you work through the statistics of the general population and so, of course we don't keep figures of members of other groups in that way anyway, right? But we do have figures on SCs and STs, and if we compare them to the picture of the broader population, statistics we have of the broader population, you realize very soon that the proportion of SCs and STs who experience atrocities of any kind, right, whether meted out against each other or by members of other groups, is far less. So they are likely to experience violence of any kind from anybody to a far less degree than members of the whole of the other sections of the population. Right? So what does that do? It creates an anomaly for caste-based research, because caste-based research, and particularly if you have a look at the so-called soft data on caste-based research, they implicitly or explicitly accept the view that SCs and STs disproportionately experience violence or atrocities, not the other way around. The figures actually tell us the exact opposite story. How comes? Third chapter, the issue of caste discrimination in the UK. Now, of course, I've been working a lot on this issue, so it makes me smile because I've talked about it repeatedly, endlessly. I keep talking about it. What's interesting about this, right? we don't have any real evidence of the existence of caste-based discrimination in the United Kingdom, right? In the sense that, of course, you can have anecdotes of all types, right? That's exactly what we have. So it's on the basis of anecdotal evidence that Parliament has sought fit to insert a provision on caste in the Equality Act. So what that means is that in future, when it's implemented, if it's implemented, I will be able to bring a civil law action against members of any other jati, if you like, and convince the court that there has been an action of caste-based discrimination against me. So that's the basic framework, right? That could happen in employment cases, in education cases, in any domain which the Equality Act already covers: housing, public authorities, provision of services and goods, etc., etc. So that provision has not yet been enacted, but in the period prior to its enactment, so the debates in Parliament and also afterwards, it was simply presupposed, apart from these anecdotal sort of stories that come up and very often invoked similar kinds of stories either in the media or by parliamentarians, you see that there is no serious study of the prevalence of caste-based discrimination in the UK. Right? After the legislation was passed, the government commissioned one study, because actually the government itself was not convinced that there should be a law on this, right? But because of certain lobby groups and so on, managed to influence parliamentarians, the then government in 2010 commissioned a study. Now, if you look at that kind of study, I mentioned the existence of anecdotal evidence. It takes around 30 different stories. It talks about the experience which people have of so-called caste-based discrimination. But it doesn't examine any other side of the story which is told, right? So, for example, you'll see, this is not directly from that report, but I'll give you another example which you'll find on the BBC website. There is a shopkeeper who's supposed to be a lower caste person, right? A woman. And she tells this story in the BBC article, right? BBC website article. That, she had a Brahmin customer and that customer refused to take change from her hand. Right? And that's obviously evidence. Yeah, but this untouchability, right? That's obviously evidence of caste-based discrimination. Now, of course, if it's in the BBC, the story gets round, right? And it constitutes part of the corpus of evidence that is brought to bear for legislating on caste discrimination. Now, consider this: the story is only told from the perspective of one person, right? The shopkeeper, who says she's a lower caste background. We don't hear the other side of the story, so we don't actually know what the customer had in her mind, right? We don't know if she would have thought, oh no, this change is insignificant, just keep it, I don't want to take the 1 penny change, or put it in the charity box. You know how when you go to pay, often there's a charity box. Maybe she meant that. We don't know, right? So we're none the wiser about what the reasons were for this lady not taking change, right? But we are told that it's a story which testifies to the existence of caste-based discrimination. And so the report that I'm talking about by the National Institute of Economic and Social Research basically replicates or reproduces many such stories. I don't want to tell you the fact that they were also directed by the same organizations who were lobbying for the legislation. So the researchers were directed to certain groups, right? Ravidasi groups and so Valmiki groups and so on, to tell particular stories, whatever, but we won't go into the methodological problem of that. Suffice it to say that this is the only official report which is said to testify for the existence of caste discrimination and therefore justifying the existence of legislation. The Equality and Human Rights Commission is a very interesting body, right? That's an official body perhaps like your National Minorities Commission or a merged version of the Women's Commission and Minorities Commission and so on. Okay. The Equality and Human Rights Commission has been for the legislation right from the word go. Even before any research was commissioned, they announced themselves to be in favor of that legislation, right? So there should be They also intervened in a test case later on, which started in 2014, on behalf of the complainant. So again, they had a particular position and a particular axe to grind. When that case was decided, and it's a very funny case, actually. I should tell you about that because it figures in my chapter. This is about the only place that I discuss that case in published form. You'll notice that the grounds on which the complainant was claiming that she was a victim of caste discrimination is very interesting. She said that, she was a Christian lady. She claimed to be Adivasi Christian. And she says that, from the time of my employment, she was hired in Delhi, apparently, right? So you guys have a lot to answer for. She was hired in Delhi to work as a domestic servant. And she said, oh, from the moment the employers first saw me, I was wearing a white sari with a red border. And that is a telltale sign of somebody being a tribal, right? And so it's on that kind of evidence that the court bought the story, the British court buys the story that this must have been a case of caste discrimination, right? And of course, there's a sprinkling of other types of allegations, but I don't want to go into so much detail, but that's the quality of evidence, right? Which a British court takes into account to accept the presence of caste discrimination. When this case was published, it was, when the final judgment was published, it was advertised quite widely in the media and so on, and of course by the lawyers of the claimant, that, see, all this time there's been an ambiguity about the existence of caste discrimination in the UK. Now we have a case which proves the existence of caste discrimination in the UK. Right? So it becomes part and parcel of the larger story of telling, or justifying the legislation. Now, the case is a very peculiar one, because what the judges say in this case is that although the legislation on caste has not been implemented, we can already use the provision on ethnicity and read caste into it. And that's why the case was allowed to go through in that way. So now you have a parallel track. You have an unimplemented law, but you also have part of the legislation which allegedly covers caste discrimination. Okay, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to go into so many legal details, but I think it's interesting the way something has happened. We also had, just to round off the point, a very famous equality lawyer, an anti-discrimination lawyer called Anthony Lester. He's in the House of Lords. He's also a Queen's Counsel, which means he's one of the top lawyers in the country. And in fact, he was one of the architects behind the old race relations legislation we have, which is kind of an exemplary piece of anti-discrimination law, if you like. He says in Parliament, with respect to the caste discrimination issue, he says, I don't see why any research is required in this area. So what do we learn from that as part of the story that I'm telling you today? That we presuppose the existence of the caste system and discrimination, which is consequent to it. We don't need any research on it. We just assume it. Okay. Now, all of those three examples, right? The issue of social justice in the passing of reservations, the question of violence and atrocities against SCs and STs, and the question of discrimination law in the United Kingdom on grounds of caste, all of them bring up some type of anomalous type of situations, right? But they also show the persistence. Despite the anomalies, there is a persisting idea that there is a caste system which is responsible either for violence or for discrimination. And thereby, it has some oppressive elements. So the essential constituents of what a caste system should be, or the basic intuitions, let's say, of what a caste system should be, are kept in place, despite the anomalies, right? Despite the lack of research, despite the existence of research which shows the opposite to what is being claimed. How do we explain this? So we have 3 chapters in the book which sort of go some way to explaining why this deep-seated intuition about the existence of a caste system. So we have a chapter by Martin Farek from the Czech Republic. He talks about what he refers to as the unifying anti-caste hypothesis, right? Now what he's saying there is that there's often made this claim that right from the time of the Buddha, maybe Mahavira, and the Bhakti movements, of course, right? I don't want to leave them out because it's such an obvious case, right? They were all types of anti-caste movements, right? They all challenged the existence of the caste system. They fought against caste discrimination, right? And their, if you like, initiators or progenitors were at the forefront of the fight against caste discrimination. Actually, Martin Farek does a fantastic job in exposing, right, the actual literature around the Buddha. I forget the name of the sutra, but there's a fantastic. There's more than one sutra actually, where talks about Buddha and this discussion he is having about what does it require to be a true Brahmana. Right? What is a true Brahmana? There is this discourse, right, that the Buddha has with some others. Now, when you examine that, actually you realize that this is not an anti-caste thing at all, right? Actually, the discussion in the ancient days that they were having is about who is a true Brahmana. It's not about destabilizing some kind of idea of caste or the caste system that may have existed at that time at all, right? So we can't really use the Buddha as an exemplary anti-caste activist, right? Although, of course, in our generation or maybe one generation before me, people have talked in that light. Neither can we use Mahavira, because there are also Jain sutras, right, which talk in very much the same light that the Buddha has his discussion about what does it constitute to be a true Brahmin. So what about the Bhakti movements?
We have also the question in the Mahabharata, Yaksha Krishna, where
Yes.
who is Brahmin?
Yes. So actually, yeah. So this testifies to the It's a recurrent question in the Indian traditions. Exactly. Yeah. What does it take to be a true Brahmin? If you like, right? Now, so what about the Bhakti movements, though? Right? Surely they were anti-caste movements, right? You don't have to go far, actually, right? I don't like to say that Ambedkar is evidence for this and that contention, right? But if you look at Ambedkar's own writing, I forget which book he talks about to this effect, but he says that actually the Bhakti movements or the saints and mystics were not interested in fighting caste discrimination at all. This is Ambedkar's own words, right? Now, as I'm saying, that is not conclusive. But Martin Farek takes the example of the movement which was founded by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, right, in and around Bengal, this area, right, and. Actually, he shows that even the commentators, right, the contemporary or semi-contemporary commentators who were writing on the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement were very clear in their assessment that this movement was not trying in any way to destabilize the caste system, right? If there was such a system, right? It's not an anti-caste movement in that sense. And one can probably say that about a lot of other movements which come under this umbrella of the Bhakti movement. So this is one issue, one argument, right, about the persistence of the intuition that there is a caste and that there have been successive movements in India which have fought against it. But then, if you take the ambiguity about the caste system seriously, you have to say, what were they actually fighting against, and what were they for, right? And it doesn't look like they were really trying to destabilize such a thing as the caste system at all. Anyway, Jacob de Roover's paper or chapter goes into the Christian theological foundations of the idea of the caste system. And in his previous writing, of course, Jacob has argued that when you look at the post-Reformation debates in Europe, one of the things you notice is that they took a particular form, right, about man's relationship with God, about the idea of true worship. What does true worship constitute of? What should be the role of the priests, if any, right? And all of those arguments, of course, the Protestants were largely on one side, but also they were against each other, if you like, because different Protestant communities began to argue against each other, right? The basic question or the basic accusation of the Protestants was that Catholics follow a form of false religion. They follow idolatrous. They are idolatrous. They follow an idolatrous religion. Right? Why? Because of the intercession of the priests. Yeah, the priestly class is what prevents access to the true doctrine, as found in the Revelation, right? And the existence of any human authority in this process of worship, right, or accessing the true revelation, makes that process of worship a form of false worship or idolatry, right? Because there is the existence of human agency there. Now. Actually, Jacob de Roover is now, if you like, modulated that analysis, and now he's saying that one has also got to look at the Christian writing on Judaism in Europe, certainly since the time of the Reformation. And one of the things you find really interesting is that the Christian assessment of Judaism, and in particular, the group of Jews called the Levites, it's the Levites who are considered to be the priests of the Jewish religion. It's the Levites who hold the power to excommunicate other Jews, right, from the tradition. It's the Levites who decide on what is true and false worship. And it's Levites who also decide on ritual purity, questions of ritual purity. So actually the Levites play a very, very fundamental role. Right? They are one among a number of tribes. Right? This is also interesting about Judaism. Right? So this polemic against Jews that the Christians developed, right? And it was developed by Catholics but carried on by the Protestants. is partly what was applied to read the Indian situation. Right? Partly it was the Catholic, the polemic against the Catholics, and partly it was the polemic against the Jews, right? Which was more or less replicated to read the Indian situations. And that is one of the reasons why the Brahmins actually become the priests of the false religion. Because obviously the Judaism and Catholicism, according to the Protestants, is a false religion. So consequently, the Indian religion becomes a false one as well. And particularly for Protestants, it's Hinduism. Yeah, it's in the form of Hinduism that the Indian religion becomes a false one. So, to round off the point, actually what Jacob is trying to uncover is why is it that it's not only that we hold on to the notion of the existence of a caste system in the Indian context, we also consider it to be deeply immoral. Right? There's a deep stain of immorality. Right? Actually, if you really take the claim of the caste system seriously, it means that Indians basically are immoral people. Right? Because all of you guys are brought up to discriminate systematically on caste grounds. Right? You must all do, more or less, because you're all members of the caste system, aren't you? Right? But that means you're also deeply immoral, because in a way, you act as if you're being moral by acting immorally. Right? Because you follow a set of doctrines, the doctrines of Hinduism. In this case, not all of you might be Hindu, whatever. So that's, if you like, a layer of morality, but actually more deeply speaking, you follow a system of false religion in the guise of Hinduism, and therefore you are fundamentally immoral, right? And that results in systematic forms of discrimination. If you take the system of a story of the immorality of the caste system seriously, that's where you get to, right? It's that every Indian actually is immoral. Now, so Jacob is actually trying to really uncover the roots of this, and his explanation, actually I found it quite convincing, is that you've got to look at the post-Reformation debates, right? In Europe, both vis-a-vis the Protestants and the Catholics, and vis-a-vis the Christians and the Jews, in order to make sense of how the Indian reality was interpreted, if you like, yeah, or seen, yeah, experienced by Western interlocutors. Right? Now, lastly, in the set of arguments is Marianne Keppen's chapter, right? And she provides really fascinating evidence of how what is the background to the emergence of the Aryan invasion theory, or do you prefer intrusion or migration? Take your pick, right? Invasion, intrusion, migration, whatever it is, right? That set of theories, how did it come about? Of course, there is the linguistic hypothesis, isn't there, right? That, once there was a discovery of the relationship between Indian languages, particularly Sanskrit and Greek Roman, one could postulate that there was this Indo-European race, and therefore, right, it had to follow that because of the European civilizing mission. There was this, need to project that onto India as well, maybe to save the idea that India should be considered a civilized culture, if you like. Actually, Marianne shows a very particular and different light to that, right? What she says is that the idea of the caste system comes first. The idea of the Aryan invasion or migration thesis or theory is an adjunct to an initial hypothesis about the caste system, right? And the caste system, why? Because partly the caste system is founded on the idea of separate races, right? When you look at the writing of Herbert Risley, the guy who was behind the Indian census during the colonial period, right? He says it very clearly and bluntly. He says, there are two races in India. One is a black one and one is a white one, right? More or less exactly he says that, right? But you see the Aryan invasion theory or intrusion theory actually coming in as an adjunct to the pre-existing theory about Indian caste system, right? As a supplement to bolster it. Today we don't think of it that way. That's why I think Marianne Keppen's chapter is a particularly original one, because she shows the relationship, yeah, between the linguistic, the caste, and the Aryan intrusion or invasion theory, right? In a proper order, right? So we need to reconsider that as well. Okay, so where am I going with all this? Right. Perhaps it's already obvious to you that the basis of the idea of the caste system therefore lies in the Western cultural experience of India. Right? It is founded on questions that Europeans were asking themselves as an outcome of their own discussions, right? About how to look at the Europeans, to look at the Indians, and also to go about in their activities with the Indians, right? To go about in India. the claim is also that this idea, this essentially Western idea of the caste system, doesn't solve any problems, nor does it provide any proper explanation for phenomena that we experience in the Indian society today. Right? The problem lies at the level of cognitive structure. Now, what do I mean by that? Partly it's a reiteration of the claim that I already made, right? That it is part of the Western cultural experience of India. Right? In that sense, one can say that there is a kind of cognitive structure which informs, right, in a way which preconditions, which is at a pre-theoretical level, right? Even before the formulation of theories occurs, it is at the pre-theoretical level that the West experiences India in this form, right? Now, one of the outcomes of this problem is that Indians cannot access this, right? At a very, very fundamental level, Indians cannot access the cognitive structure that goes into understanding of Indian society and culture in this way, in the Western way. Right? Although the Western Orientalist discourse presents itself as an objective discourse about Indian and other cultures and societies, it's not objective. Right? It's not scientific in the least, actually. Right? Why? Because it's an outcome of the cultural assumptions, the cultural preconditions that exist in the Western culture. As part of the cognitive structure, which then goes into formulating ideas about Indian culture and society. Therefore, the idea of the caste system also can never exist outside of this framework. Right? Now, you might ask, well, you know, Indians repeat this idea today, right? We repeat. In fact, many of us just insist that there is a caste system. In fact, I find Westerners today much more open to this argument that I'm making than Indians, right? Indians tend to insist, no, after all I've said, they'll say, but there is a caste system, isn't there? One thing I should say, I'm not saying that there is no such thing as caste, by the way. Right? So don't mistake me for saying that there is no such thing as caste. I'm not saying that. Right? I know, of course, there is a problem when it comes to finding the exact reference for caste in a social structure that actually exists in India. Of course, there is a problem there at that maybe linguistic or referential level, there is a problem, right? Because till to this day, we want to say that jati is caste, we want to say varna is caste. In the British legislation, you see that they're also insisting that biradri is caste. What about kula? What about gotra? You know, all these things, are they also going to become parts of caste or the understanding of caste, right? When we use the word caste. So I take for granted that there is that level of ambiguity, but yet I'm not going to deny that there is such a thing as caste, right? So let's leave aside that problem. What we are saying is that the caste system, the idea of the caste system, cannot exist in India. If it exists, it only exists as an idea in the Western cultural experience, right? So how to account for the fact that Indians themselves today insist that we have caste? Partly it's the misunderstanding of this issue between caste and caste system, right? Because of course Indians are aware that there is caste, there is such a thing as jati, I have a jati, you have a jati, my friends have a jati, everybody has jati more or less, right? So, yes, okay, fine, fair enough, you have caste, so what, right? But I would still say you don't have a caste system. But there is another group of Indians, maybe overlapping with the first one, and there are many of us actually, who want to insist that there is also a caste system. Right? Now, I would say that is part of the acceptance of the colonial story. Balagangadhara describes it as a form of colonial consciousness, which underwrites the claim of immorality, the fundamental immorality of Indians at large. Right? We generally accept that. Right? We have this inferiority thing. Right? But we call it an inferiority complex, but it's not inferiority. Basically, what it means is that because the European cultural claims about Indian culture and society are essentially normative in nature, they are bound to put Indians in an inferior moral position. If they put Indians in a morally inferior position, they're also putting the Westerners in a morally superior position. That's part and parcel of the baggage that we've been taught to accept since the colonial period. It's not necessarily a cognitively more convincing story. Even for Indians, right? When you really think about it, if you want to really say, my culture is systematically immoral, you can say that, right? But actually, to most Indians, right, all the student groups that I've been talking, It hasn't been a very convincing story. They don't regard themselves as, incurably immoral. They don't regard themselves like that. Yeah, and I would imagine nor do you, right? You don't want to, right? So, still we've accepted this story, right? Because of the force of colonial violence, right? A story which is cognitively unconvincing at the beginning is different from a scientific explanation. What a scientific explanation does is provide perhaps new information, a new theoretical framework through which to look at phenomena, right? What it does, it might prove useful to you, right? It might displace your native framework of understanding things, right? But what it does is equip you with new information, new theoretical framework, which allows you to solve a greater number of problems at some level. What the caste system story does is that it simply doesn't allow you to solve problems. It doesn't explain any aspect properly of your own culture and society to you. What it does, it creates more and more anomalies, right, in your experience with the world. And because of that, it's not going to solve any real problems for you, right? It's like a doctor misdiagnosing a disease and then saying, ye lijye and everything will be fine. Come and see me in the morning if the pain still persists. Well, the pain is there, isn't there? Right? Because we've accepted this story of the caste system. The pain is very much there, right? Whether we like to admit it or not. So I think I'll just stop there. And perhaps before I stop, I should say, whatever I'm saying, of course, it presents, it's a very partial segment of what could be the potential range of research one can do. But hopefully this is also a provocation for us to go and do better and better research into Indian culture and society. What I'm also not doing is neglecting or dismissing claims that there are injustices in Indian society. Of course there are. It's a society of human beings, isn't it? Don't all societies have injustices? Obviously there are. Let's go and research them, right? But let's not assume that the caste system is a necessary explanation for the kinds of ills we see, right? Because as I'm saying to you, I think it's probably going to create more and more anomalies if you go down that route. Okay, thank you very much for being so kind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. You have raised so many issues with regard to the present understanding of caste system. I think we should safely, we are not referred to the ancient origins to the Africa caste system. And I requested Dr. Sharadendu to start the discussion on this.
Should I? Fine, thank you, sir.
Discussing civil marriage.
It's been a pleasure listening to Dr. Prakash Shah. You see, a student of history, student of British history, few things strike me. Like a society which has given so much in terms of ideas the last 400 years, late 16th century, country of Shakespeare, Newton, which has flourished because of its empirical research, how that society would come down to a pass where they would enact a legislation which happens to be based on very, say, uncertain foundation. You see, I mean, you have given several examples. Say, I will take up the simplest ones. The example of the Adivasi woman from Delhi. The fact she was wearing a white sari with a red border. But I think this is the dress which our mothers and wives have used to go to the puja room all the time.
Yeah.
All our life we've seen our mothers and sisters doing that, So this is very funny.
And also wives.
Well, wives, of course. Yes, they do. Yes. So the point is, you see, now I would not expect this kind of writing from those young officers who wrote the district gazetteers, whom we have read intensively when we were doing our masters and PhDs, So this is surprising. Secondly, as you say about this Catholic Protestant, say, intervention in this debate, you see, ever since the Reformation occurred with Martin Luther nailing that thesis to the church door, and how it spreads to England, Henry's Reformation. Some of your old students will be listening to me once again after 30 years or so. That that society, post-Reformation European society was so much blood-soaked, isn't it? It was war. And anti-Catholic legislation was very much there in the English statute book till late 1830s, 40s. Slavery was abolished only very late. So how that society, which has just come out of this traumatic experience, human experience, shameful experience, could dabble with such ideas? I mean, I just can't understand. So I'm just putting several questions. Answer will be with you, with the distinguished participants here. Secondly, what kind of Catholic social morality one can think in this? Say, if we ask very hard questions about the theological foundations of Christian theology, it's going to be a very explosive theme, isn't it? We're not going to talk about how Christian theology borrowed from Judaism and how Islamic theology borrowed from them in turn, And what kind of havoc they created in the world last 2,000 years. As compared to this society has not seen this kind of violence within the society. And all that violence that we see now, say so-called anti-Dalit violation, or even say inter-caste, upper caste so-called violence. This has no history. And often, you see, I'll just give two examples before I stop. Some Dalit Hindus were harassed, their houses were burnt in North Bengal, Malda. The victims were all Dalit, most of them refugees from Bangladesh, East Pakistan. Those who attacked them were Muslims, This happened about September, October. The central government sent a delegation from Delhi. All 3 MPs from West Bengal, probably one other important. They were not allowed to get off at the Malda station. Look, the MPs belonging to the ruling party, they were packed off. I remember the distinctly the photograph of the train. After a month or so, when the Patel agitation started in Gujarat, some Dalits were bashed up by so-called upper caste Hindus. I don't know the story. Immediately, Mamata Banerjee sent a team, and they were allowed to go and visit the village. So how this happened? So it is politicization. So I told a very important spokesperson of BJP, who happens to be a good friend of mine, that how come you allow such things? He had no answer. So you see, much of this so-called harassment, persecution of Dalits, the so-called lower caste people, are politically motivated. Now, India, you understand this because India, the social science research, unfortunately, has been controlled by one ideological group for all these 60 years. And our politicians actually gave the idea. Mool mantra came from the politicians. And so people, those who actually want to know something about it, they never had the opportunity, the academic opportunity, the fora, to talk about how to rectify these things. Now, these are several questions. I'm sure I can ask many more questions, but this distinguished audience has many more questions to ask, so I'll stop here. So, fine. Ask questions? Yes, you can ask questions now. Yes, please ask. Please ask question. Sir, Professor Ketia, sir.
Of course, it's impossible to have absolutely egalitarian society anywhere in the world. So, what is exactly wrong with something called jati pratha? I mean, how do you translate this expression jati pratha? This was in many ways birth-based. Jati means birth-based. So you have members of the society who are twice born, and you have members of the society who are once born, Rijas and others. And so you discriminate on that basis. So what do you have to say? I mean, we do discriminate in India based upon one's birth.
Yes. Okay, I mean, you see, unless you have some kind of normative theory which says that discrimination is wrong, right? Do we have a theory which says that discrimination?
We can have all the questions.
Oh, sorry. Okay,
We
yeah,
can
sure,
take
sure.
time.
Yeah, okay.
Any more questions, please?
Yes, questions? Yes?
I just had one question.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I'm not a student of history. You're saying that you're not denying the existence of caste, although you have a problem with the idea of the caste system, which you think is a construct of the Westerners and how they experience our society. Can you just, for the sake of clarity, what do you mean by the caste system then? When you're not denying the existence of caste, what do you mean by the caste system? Why do you have a problem with the caste system and not so much with the existence of caste?
Yeah. Please.
मैं हिंदी में बोल सकता हूँ?
हाँ बिल्कुल
जरूर।
हाँ बिल्कुल जी बोलिए।
अगर कास्ट सिस्टम इंडिया में एग्जिस्ट नहीं करता है या करता था और जाति व्यवस्था और वर्ण व्यवस्था ये दो व्यवस्था होती हैं या होती थी तो कास्ट सिस्टम वेस्टर्नर्स ने डिस्क्राइब किया वेस्टर्न फ्रेमवर्क में डिस्क्राइब किया समझ में आता है तो हमने क्या डिस्क्राइब किया जाति व्यवस्था के बारे में क्या हम उसके बारे में बोल सकते हैं और जाति और कास्ट को इक्वेट करने में क्या समस्या है सिमेंटिक्स या बाल की खाल के अलावा
Right. Please.
So the Spanish colonial experience, there's the whole casta system, or depending on the whole how Spanish are you, how native are you, there's a hierarchy which is formed. So does that inform the Western worldview of caste in some sense?
Please.
Yes. Yes, yes.
There are two things I would like to ask. One is that in the British context, is that when somebody moves from India to Britain, I mean, does he carry his caste? Because all the caste gets redefined in a way that whether you live in Kensington or you live in Hounslow, I mean, does it matter? Because at the airport when you are there, the guy who treats you, whether it's Indian or Pakistani, he treats you according to the residential address. So I really don't know whether that exists there also, because I've seen my own ex-students who live there, they are pained to tell you that I'm not in South Hall, but I'm in this place, I'm in this place. So I believe that, it depends. And another thing I've seen, I've been to houses in England where I found that, there is quite a lot of, what do you call it, Aryan and pre-Aryan rituals, not pre-Aryan but Aryan rituals, and also kind of Vedic mantras would be chanted, which I haven't found anywhere in Indian houses that you read Gayatri mantra at the dining table or something like that. I mean, does it happen that your caste becomes more solidified and becomes kind of pan-Aryan thing? Another thing, I have a question about India, but I think that since I was just looking at your, on the phone I was looking at your, about you, so I could get that probably you would be one of the person to answer this, that it always puzzles me whether in India, among the Dalits like Mayavati, the way she keeps romanticizing Buddhism, she keeps interacting with Ambedkar and Ambedkar philosophy without sometimes kowtowing to them, without not following them, and without not converting to Buddhism. Does it really suggest an extramural growth and trajectory of the Dalits? Can we talk about that? Can we say that this is happening in India? I'm sure that you are talking about the Western experience, but this is one of the things which is very, you can make out in the Dalit politics of India that somebody is romanticizing, romancing with, not romanticizing, romancing with Ambedkar, or somebody romancing with Buddhism, yet not following it.
Yes, you have a question, Shweta? Please.
I think, sir, your book and your topic of research is very timely, and it's really very much needed, because my generation is definitely getting affected by the reservations and the caste. And I remember when I went to college and we learned about it, like, who cares about your caste? Like, why would we even know that? But when I went abroad, I really felt that whatever I was reading about Indian society, it was almost like MP. You cannot understand Indian society without your understanding of caste system. My question to you is a couple of weeks ago, I happened to read this article, a unfortunately, online articles are hard to, you can't really tell how credible they are, but you might be aware of this. Is there any historical basis to this that the Britishers in like 1861 created the caste, like in a way they classified it, saying that these many people will fall into the first order of the caste system and second and third and fourth, and that so that it gets ingrained into the conscious mind of the people, they said that you have to utilize it to avail any judicial or health scheme or something like that, so then people would remember, oh, I belong to that caste system and I have to exercise it.
Great. Very good. Any question? Priyadarshi, of course.
Mr. Shah, it's a pity that I came quite late, so I do not have a right in that sense to ask a question. But I just wish to know that, one of the areas where we can study the Hindu caste system, but outside colonial experience, may be Nepal. Like Nepal is such a place which has not been affected by many things. Like here we all accept Sunday as the holiday, but Nepal has its Saturday, because Saturday is slow and the Sanaishchara come from there. So even in Nepal, which is when the Communist Party came to power, you have all the Communist Party hierarchy, they were dominated by the Brahmin, the Pushpa Kamal Dal and all Baura Bhattarai, and the lower cadres were people come from a different caste. So, and another thing, there can be some difference, like here in South India, we have the rise of the Dravidianism, whereas Brahmins were demonized for all the wrongs in the South Indian society. But if you go among the Tamils of Sri Lanka, there you find very little of Brahmins are there, and the Vellalas, who here come somewhere in the middle, they are at the top orders, and and they have dominated everything, including the priests of temple come from the Vellala society. There are no Brahmins, but even among Sri Lankan Tamils, there is no less of a discrimination, or there is no less of a pride for being a Hindu. Can we also study of the Hindu caste system outside the Indian experience about these two societies I referred to? One is about the Nepal and also about the Sri Lankan Tamils. This is the question. But one good thing is that I read a book long ago, written by a person from Gujarat 100 years ago, in which he claimed that a caste is not a dividing factor in the society, rather it is a uniting factor. If the institution of caste was not there, you could not have united so many disparate people, in India would have been broken into millions of bits without no common reference point at all. So it is, of course. Thank you.
Any more question? Yes.
I'm just supporting her statement. Actually, during my PhD thesis, I read a book, Hindu Tribes and Caste, written by M.S. Farek, the London missionary. He divided the Indian society on the basis of the Varna, and also the physical structure, dress, and on the behalf of the occupation. Like Brahmins, who white forehead, put the mark on the forehead, long eyes, long fingers. So he also divided the Indian society on behalf of the physical structure, occupation, and the dress also. So it's quite that they taking the interest in the Indian society and also try to just convert the Indian society according to their ideas.
So happy. Please, happy.
Just I would like to remind Professor Shah the sutta which you forgot to recite, that is Vashal Sutta. Na jaccha brahmano hoti, na jaccha vasla hoti. Kamna vasla hoti and kamna brahmana hoti. And this pan-Indian system that you can say it is within the whole Asia, particularly in Indian subcontinent, you can say this caste system so far, Buddha, already not is an anti-caste system, the Buddhist movement, and unifying anti-caste movement that is there. And so you can see even in Sri Lanka, and the caste system is there. So that way, that is not pan-Indian, subcontinent system.
Dr. Prakash.
Yes.
Sir, I want to ask.
This will be the last question.
Yes, please. I will speak in
बोलिए.
सर आपने कहा जैसे भक्ति मूवमेंट है उसमें वो एंटी कास्ट नहीं था, तो मतलब आपने ऐसा कैसे कर, मतलब आपका इसका रेफरेंस क्या है? एक दूसरा ये जैसे अगर आप कहते हो कास्ट सिस्टम कास्ट नहीं है, किसी की नहीं कास्ट है, फिर ये मैट्रिमोनियल देखते हैं, मतलब ये विज्ञापन शादी में हर संडे को, भाई इस कास्ट में शादी होनी चाहिए, इस कास्ट में नहीं होनी चाहिए। आई एम फ्रॉम हरियाणा एंड आई एम फ्रॉम शेड्यूल्ड कास्ट, कुमार कास्ट है, एंड आई डोंट फील inferiority complex because of any
No, not necessarily.
Good.
No sir, I will speak.
No problem. Please.
सर जैसे तिलक ने बुक लिखी थी, आपको शायद पता होगा, यू नो
बालगंगाधर तिलक,
Arctic Home to Vedas.
तिलक
Yeah, he supported Aryan invasion theory. Yeah, then why he supported Aryan invasion theory? Or he want to prove that Brahmins or twice born are more superior than they can attack the indigenous people of India.
अम्बेडकर जी ये थीसिस नहीं मानते थे
क्या?
अम्बेडकर जी ये थीसिस नहीं मानते थे, ये उल्टा हो गया फिर।
नहीं सर,
ऐसा चलता है।
ये मैं कह रहा हूँ जैसे बालगंगाधर तिलक था, मतलब वो ब्राह्मण था ना,
हाँ,
मतलब वो कास्टिज्म फॉलो करता था, मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ।
सब ब्राह्मण नहीं फॉलो करते
क्या? नहीं
सब ब्राह्मण नहीं follow करते।
ये सर आप ऐसे कैसे बोल सकते हो? जैसे इंटरकास्ट मैरिज क्यों नहीं होती फिर?
बहुत होता है आजकल,
बहुत बहुत था, क्या मतलब हुआ? आप परसेंटेज देखो ना, कितनी परसेंटेज है?
ठीक है, ठीक है,
चलिए बोलिए।
ठीक है। आपका क्वेश्चन रखिए। सवाल
क्वेश्चन ये है ना, मतलब आप कह रहे हो ये जो मैनिपुलेशन है ये सिर्फ वेस्टर्न ने किया है। मैं मतलब ये नहीं बोल आपकी सारी बात गलत है, सारी बात किसी की गलत नहीं होती, सारी बात ना किसी की ठीक होती। अगर मैं आपको क्रिटिसाइज कर रहा हूँ तो इसका मतलब ये क्रिटिसाइज करके, क्योंकि आप वही बात है, क्रिटिसाइज करने से कुछ नहीं आएगा, वैसे चुप चुप रहना चाहिए क्या वो।
बिल्कुल बोलिए।
मतलब आप ये कह रहे हैं कास्टिज्म सिस्टम पहले नहीं था, इसका क्या प्रूफ है? अगर कास्ट वायलेंस आप बोल रहे हो कि जैसे अपर कास्ट वर्सेस नॉन अपर कास्ट वायलेंस था, और आप कह रहे थे कि जो वेस्टर्न थे उन्होंने सिर्फ जो दलित के ऊपर जुल्म हुआ वो तो दिखाया, और जो दलित ने किया, आपका मतलब ये है ना कि जो दलित ने जुल्म किया वो नहीं दिखाया उनके सर्वे के अंदर। आप कह रहे हो कि उसका रेफरेंस स्टैटिक्स नहीं दिया, मतलब फिर वो किसने लेना था स्टैटिक्स से? ब्राह्मण का काम होता था पढ़ाना, तो उसने क्यों नहीं पढ़ाया समाज को? प्रॉब्लम तो है ना। अब वैसे कह रहे हो कास्टिज्म नहीं था तो ब्राह्मण क्यों पढ़े लिखे थे? वो मंदिर के वो पुजारी बन गए तो दूसरे क्यों नहीं बने? प्रॉब्लम तो थी, कास्टिज्म की प्रॉब्लम तो थी ना। अब ये भक्ति मूवमेंट था, ये रविदास लगा लो, कबीर लगा लो, उसके दो इधर हुए तभी तो पता लगेगा वो एंटी कास्ट था या कास्ट के फेवर में था।
ओके, दैट्स ओके। एनीथिंग एल्स?
क्या सर? तुलसीदास जी तो कहते हैं कि कास्ट सिस्टम की उनके भी रोल।
हाँ, वो कहते हैं ना वो डोलेवार सुधीर कुसुमनाई वो मनुस्मृति था, अभी उसकी मूर्ति भी लगा रखी है राजस्थान हाई कोर्ट में। अब ये कह रहे कास्टिज्म है ही नहीं, अब ये कोई इंग्लिश बोल के ये जुमला कह रहा कास्टिज्म नहीं है, तो नहीं ना मानेंगे नहीं है।
मनु की मूर्ति नहीं लगी राजस्थान हाई कोर्ट में, लगना चाहिए, कोशिश की।
ओके, प्लीज।
नहीं सर, इसका आंसर
आप बोलिए, आपको क्वेश्चन
अभी तो आंसर
अब ऐसा एक्सप्लेनेशन दे रहे हैं, क्वेश्चन
कभी पूछ जाओ पीछे,
क्वेश्चन दीजिए।
ये क्वेश्चन ये बता रहे आप कह रहे कास्टिज्म वेस्टर्न का इन्फ्लुएंस था उसकी वजह से है, लेकिन कास्टिज्म कुछ तो है ना, कुछ तो परसेंटेज में है, उसको आप दिखाओ ना, तभी कुछ ठीक होगा। अगर बुराई को आप नहीं दिखाओगे,
Let him say. He can speak for himself. You carry on.
जो कास्ट सिस्टम था उसमें जो बुराई उसको नहीं दिखाएंगे आप कह कास्टिज्म अच्छा था। ये क्या बात है? इधर वन वे कन्वर्सेशन हुआ ना,
ऐसे कोई नहीं बोले ना,
उन्होंने नहीं कहा।
नहीं सर, ये कह रहे हो
आप आर्गुमेंट मत कीजिए, आप क्वेश्चन दीजिए, जवाब देंगे।
क्यों समझ में नहीं आया आपको? और क्या ये मैं कह रहा हूँ, जैसे आप कह रहे हैं कास्ट सिस्टम नहीं,
भैया आप
let him answer.
नहीं
You allow him to answer.
आपको जितनी बात करनी हो हम आप
चलो मैं बोल रहा हूँ
आपको कहने को,
चलो मैं पॉइंट वाइज बोल रहा हूँ, प्लीज मैं पॉइंट वाइज बोल रहा हूँ।
आपको सुनना जरूरी है हमारा, मैं तो सुनूंगा जब तक।
सर मैं आपको बोल ही रहा हूँ, आप पढ़े लिखे
कोई बात नहीं, हम सुनेंगे।
हाँ, वो हम लोग सुने। नो दैट्स ऑलराइट। आप बताओ,
हरियाणा के इंसिडेंट लगा सर।
अच्छा बताओ बेटे, तुमको 15 मिनट समय दिया जाए या 10 मिनट, कितना जो बोलो हम लोग।
टाइम तो बहुत है ना, अभी टाइम कहाँ पर रात में चलिए।
अभी टाइम
आपको नहीं, टाइम सब लोगों का होता है।
टाइम तो सर कोई बात, अगर मैं अच्छा बोलता हूँ तो, अगर अच्छा नहीं बोलता तो मुझे बता दो।
नहीं ऐसी बात,
अगर आपको अच्छा लगता है
जल्दी करो, टाइम
देखो तुमको 10 मिनट टाइम दे दो, बहुत होता है
10 मिनट।
नहीं आप भी आर्गुमेंट करो ना, जैसे मैं क्या झूठ बोल रहा हूँ।
ये आर्गुमेंट का सवाल नहीं है, हम आया है यू प्रेजेंट किया है।
चलो मैं क्वेश्चन बता रहे आप कह रहे थे जैसे
तुम बता लो पहले, अपने आत्मा को संतोष करो पहले, और पहले तुमको हम रोकेंगे नहीं, करो बोलो।
आप बोल रहे जैसे कास्ट सिस्टम है वो, उसके आपके उसमें बैड जैसे कास्टिज्म में कोई बताइए बुरी चीज है, आप तो ये क्या देखो ना वेस्टर्न कैथोलिक का इन्फ्लुएंस, उसकी मोरालिटी है, वो बोल रही है कास्ट में।
तो वो तो आप कह चुके हैं पहले, आगे बढ़िए।
फिर आप ये बताओ ना, आप उसका बैड चीज क्यों नहीं बता रहे उसकी कास्ट?
हाँ ठीक है, चलो।
और ये जो आप कह रहे हैं अभी इंटरकास्ट सिस्टम नहीं है,
हाँ।
अभी मैं जैसे मुखर्जी नगर में कोचिंग IS की मेरा पिछले बार में था, तो कोई नहीं हुआ। तो जो उस सिस्टम, एक लड़की है सर जैसे वो जाट है तो वो कास्टिज्म करती है, और उसके कोई रुपए भी बहुत है।
अच्छा आगे चलो और बताओ।
मतलब जो इकोनॉमिक फैक्टर है ना उसका।
देखो ऐसी बात है कि मैं जब इनको सुन रहा था तो पहली बात मैंने कहा मन में कि नो वेट, एक सुन लो मेरी बात, और वो मैं तुमको उसका एक प्रस्ताव दे रहा हूँ। तो मैंने कहा कि शाह साहब इतनी दूर से आए हैं और ये केवल हिस्टोरियन लोगों से बोल रहे हैं थोड़ा बहुत। हमने कहा कि मैं नहीं बोलूँगा, तो इसलिए कि मैंने कहा कि मैं शाह साहब को इनवाइट करूँगा अपने घर कहें तो, अगर कहीं 5 स्टार में भी रहना चाहें तो मैं इनवाइट करूँगा, और इनसे घंटों, कोई 10-12 घंटा, और सचमुच ये कोई बनावट की बात नहीं है, मैं इनसे बातचीत करना चाहता हूँ। मैंने आप लोगों से कह दिया कि मैं नहीं बोलना चाहता हूँ, तो पता नहीं है, मैं आपसे पूछूंगा। और दूसरी बात ये कह रहा हूँ आपसे साथ साथ कि आप कंबोडिया आओ, 15 को मैं चल रहा हूँ, और आप चलो मेरे साथ, और ये देखा जाए कि विदेशों में कास्ट सिस्टम कैसे हुआ। और तो बेटे अब हम इन तुमको और शाह साहब दोनों को आज रात्रि विश्राम मेरे घर पर चलने के लिए कहूँगा। बैठो, आराम से बात करो, कहीं कोई दिक्कत है, और अभी भी बात कर लो।
और मैं मुखर्जी नगर के पास रहता हूँ, कल मेरे साथ चलो।
हाँ,
और मैं भी रहता हूँ।
चलो थोड़ा और बात करो।
हाई टाइम प्लीज।
अब छोड़ दो,
Let him say it.
जल्दी हो गया कुछ क्वेश्चन? ना हो गया। अब शाह साहब को बोलने दो, अब बोलने दो शाह साहब को।
ओके सर।
हमको भी तुम्हारे ही पक्ष में है और आपको इनको ले चलना।
Yes, please.
Yeah, thank you. You are invited to UK as well. Come with me to London.
Hello.
And we can talk as well. I'll take you to a nice restaurant. Okay, so the existence of क्या कहा था आपने? जाति
I mean, there was some form of discrimination, some form of division in the society. Call it by whatever name you would.
Yeah. Okay. So when we use the word discrimination, it gives that connotation of being an immoral system, right? Today we are calling it an immoral system. In our traditions, are such things regarded as immoral? Of course, there are people who would say yes, they have been regarded as immoral. My contention is that whatever these so-called discriminations were, they don't necessarily testify to the existence of a caste system. I think their immorality can only be proved if you have some kind of normative idea of non-discrimination or equality. So they are not ipso facto immoral, right? They may actually have been the reverse. They have indicate a deep sense of morality within the Indian traditions. So we cannot argue about them in just one way. That's part of the problem we face. So, and that's an intercultural problem. Why is it that from the perspective of one culture, a so-called system is viewed as immoral, whereas from the perspective of another culture, a system is actually viewed as potentially, arguably, deeply moral system, right? So, and of course, I don't accept this hypothesis that Indian cultures and traditions are endemically or congenitally immoral. Any culture which is congenitally immoral will destroy itself sooner or later, right? The Indian culture is not such a culture, I think. So that is how I would just say that in a kind of brief way. Yeah, actually, the second questioner said something about why there is a problem with caste. No, I think I haven't written it down correctly. Now I've forgotten. You see all these questions. Jati Varna Vyavastha. Who says that when Gandhi and Radhakrishnan and so on, people like that were talking about Jati or Varna Vyavastha, and in fact they advocated it as an ideal form of society. How do we know exactly what they were talking about, right? And of course, one could make the same point about Bal Gangadhar Tilak as well. You see, all of these people were, to a certain extent, right, willy-nilly, under the influence of colonialism. in a sense, they distorted both colonial ideas, or the Western ideas, I should say, and ideas from which they had picked up from their own traditions. Right? So today, it's very, very difficult for us to disentangle which parts of their discussions or discourses represented some kind of adequate account of the Indian traditions of that time, and which ones were the kind of distortive dimensions which they had borrowed from their westernized education and so on. Right? And one can say that about so many Indian thinkers. You know, you name it, right down from Narendra Modi right down to Bal Gangadhar Tilak. You can say all of them have that problem. Right? So it's a bit difficult, yeah, to really identify exactly what they were saying. At best, I can say to you that as a hypothesis, we should work along the lines that they were distorting both ideas, both the Western ideas and ideas from which they had picked up from their own traditions, I would say. I'm not saying that they didn't have an intuition about something real, right? That they were not trying to get at something real from within their societies. They were, right? They were making an attempt also to liberate their own societies, right? From the colonial yoke, from the yoke of colonial ideas, and so on. So there is something in their writing, but what is it? How should we study it? Yeah? How should we identify it? Yeah? What is it about that reveals some deep intuition that comes out of the Indian traditions more deeply, right? Like more thoroughly or more in a more widespread way. Those are research questions that we haven't pursued yet, yeah, which we need to pursue. But one thing I think which is interesting that you are pointing to is that layer of colonial consciousness, right? Those people who lived through colonialism and actually live also today in the post-colonial so-called period have this problem, and we don't have an easy way to understand it. We really don't have a good way of understanding exactly what they were going on about, right? So let's leave it there. Spanish and castes. Yeah, of course it was the Portuguese who came to India who brought with them. I'm now calling it the Latinate word, yeah, the Latinate terminology, which maybe derives from Latin, which both the Portuguese and the Spanish were using. There are two steps to this, right? And if you look at the article by Martin Farek in the book, he actually refers to it. But there's more detailed work on this. The idea of casta, which the Spanish and Portuguese were working with, had a deep connotation of purity of blood, which was directly linked to religion and the extent to which or how far back conversion had happened to Christianity within that particular line or lineage, right? So it's very much linked to purity of blood. So of course, when the Europeans visited India or came to India, they had brought with them this baggage. What we don't know exactly is how and why they saw that the Indians were practicing something similar to that. One thing we can say, you see, if you follow the hypothesis that Balagangadhara puts forward, right? He says that Indian culture is not a culture which knows of religion. So when the Westerners, like the Portuguese, came to India, they brought with them certain ideas of religion, right? Which means that some connotation of group membership went with religion. And actually in the Latinate phraseology, it was also linked to purity of blood, yeah, which means how many generations ago you were converted. Was that something that operated as in the background when the Portuguese came here? Yes, most probably, right? Was that something that determined how they went about their business with Indian society? Most probably, but we need to do research on this. But we don't know exactly the effect that had on distorting ideas of jati and so on, right? So one thing we do know that it was already with the Portuguese time that the Brahmins were identified as the priests of the Indian religions. But it took the Protestants to identify the Indian religion with Hinduism, which was directly linked to a kind of social structure known as the caste system. Right? So it's very much the caste system idea is not an Indian idea. I should repeat again for those who don't agree with me in particular. The caste system idea is a Protestant European idea. Right? So please, we should stop describing Indian society and culture as if it has a caste system. By all means, talk about it as if it has castes. By all means, talk about the marriage preferences that Indians have. But don't assume that these are immoral preferences. Right? I don't know why people assume that they are immoral preferences, unless, as I'm saying, you have some kind of normative theory which says, I should be able to marry whoever I like. Right? Why is that necessarily any more moral than marrying somebody who my parents like? right? Unless I have some idea of individual autonomy that goes with it, which also comes from Europe, some idea of equality, some idea of non-discrimination, right? So what we have today, as I'm saying, and you can go right back to Bal Gangadhar Tilak, is a series of distortion upon distortion upon distortion. So the way we are talking about Indian traditions today is we assume that they have a deep immorality, at their core, right? And so everything we do, like marriage preferences or this or that, it seems to have a connotation of immorality. Let's drop that idea to start with. Let's start at least from a neutral base. Let's say Indian society is neither moral or immoral. At least let's do that as scientists. Why do you assume that it's an immoral culture, right? With a sort of a plethora of immoral practices. Why do we assume that, right? If our ancestors advocated the practice of this generation after generation after generation, wasn't there something to that, for heaven's sake? Didn't they have some kind of insights about tradition and culture and morality? Didn't they? Right? Or are all ancestral traditions destined for the garbage bin? If you accept that, then okay, let's convert to Christianity or something. Let's do it. Not Buddhism, though. It's not going to prevent you. Aryan rituals, let's not even go there, right? Because what is an Aryan ritual? Is it something from Arya Samaj or something like that? I don't know.
No.
What is an Aryan ritual?
Aryan, I mean that, what we understand in India by the kind of way caste is entrusted, the way rituals are happening in houses, if you go there and then it's going to kind of anthropomorphic gods. It is really Vedic.
Look, let me answer your question in a very indirect way. Let me answer your question in a very indirect way. You see, I was born in Kenya. I wasn't educated under a kind of education system which Indira Gandhi oversaw. Which means I don't have the same complexes about caste that Indians in India have today. And that is true for most people in the diaspora, except maybe for some Americans in the Hindu-American Foundation. They are very embarrassed about their caste, right? But I don't have that. And most of the people I know in the diaspora don't have that. We don't have a complex about saying we are of this jati or that jati. We don't think we are immoral people. What's happened since the time, particularly of Indira Gandhi in India, I think, although this is not part of my presentation, is that the education system has become inundated with the allegation that Indians are congenitally immoral. You guys have been taught that from the word go, I think, right? And that's part of the problem you have and I have with each other, if you like. I don't have any kind of complex. I don't think I'm immoral. Many of you think you're immoral, or you might not personally think you're immoral, but you think every other Indian is immoral.
You're told so.
Right? Yeah.
The system has dinned into your ears.
Yeah. So that's part of this kind of recent period of history. We are in the Council for Historical Research, recent period of history, contemporary history, which diaspora Indians, particularly those who left before, around the time of independence or just before or whatever, we don't have that kind of complex. You see? In our context, in East Africa and so on, of course, all these jati organizations, as they do in India actually, among the uneducated classes in India, you also have the flourishing of jati organizations. In the same way, that is the basic social structure that we also employ to organize in the diaspora. No problem, right? And the argument that I have against the caste discrimination legislation in the UK is that it's going to attack that. Any Tom, Dick and Harry, or Harish can come along and say, oh, you have a jati organization, that means you're discriminating on grounds of caste, right? Next thing I know, the charity status of my organization is finished, because the Equality Commission will come in and say, no, that means part of its funding base is over and done with, right? Because charity status also gives you some funding preferences, some tax preferences, and so all of these things will simply go underground. Right? That is the consequence of the importation of this kind of caste-based politics that we have from India today. That's what's happening in the UK. We had no issue. It's the importation of all these, Dalit this and that, all of this kind of stuff that's coming in. Most of the Indians, you talk to them in the UK, they don't know what a Dalit is. What is that? It's happened here over the last 30, 40 years. You guys have created this problem. You're going to have to solve it. But now it's spreading. Next thing you know, there will be a caste discrimination law in Australia because the same vocabulary is spreading there, right? And Australian media organizations are stirring this up. Had Clinton been elected in the United States, you would have had a law there. Within the next 5 years, almost definitely, next 4 years, you would have had a law there, right? So this problem is spreading. If you don't solve it in India, The United Nations will come, and they're already doing that anyway, and they're going to pressurize India and say, look, you guys are immoral, you have to reform your entire social system. The best thing for you is to become Protestant. The United Nations is doing that right now, yeah? Trust me, through the US Committee on International Religious Freedom, right? And they will be helped to do that by the Hindu American Foundation, right? So be very careful where this is going. Yeah? If you don't rethink this very, very seriously right now, right, you're not going to be able to solve this problem, right? And the political correctness in India is going to get worse and worse, and you will not have any real freedom of expression in a short while, right? So that's what I will say, in a very brief way. Nepal, Sri Lanka, I don't know. Yeah, it could, of course, one should study that, right? It may, for the exact reason that I just said, it might be, interesting to study that. I wouldn't say that the leaders of the anti-caste movements, like the leftist movements, are not Brahmins in India as well. They are, right? Many of them, or some kind of background. Whether Buddha would agree they are Brahmin or not, that's a different question, right? And we can't ask him today. Now, this question of British classification is quite important. Of course, many of you will know the study called Castes of Mind by Nicholas Dirks. Yeah, those people who are into caste studies will know this, right? Nicholas Dirks says that, okay, in pre-colonial India, there was no such thing as a caste system. But in the post-colonial period, there has become a caste system because of the state's classification of people. He also accepts that the British civil servants, right, when they were doing their census studies and so on, could not insist or could not inculcate their sense of classification on the Indian people, right? Because they started with this kind of version, very sterile version of the caste system. They tried to apply it to different places they went. The reports by all the census officials were like, oh my God, we are going crazy. These Indians don't accept all these classifications, right? And they are telling us all kinds of things, and we don't know what box to put them in. So arbitrary classification, all kinds of things were happening, right? After, what was it, from 1871 to 1931, these colonial census, they just dropped it, right? They were a bit stubborn. It took them 60 years to drop it, but eventually they dropped it. What do we have now in contemporary India? The revival of the caste census.
Last census.
Right? Why do you do it? Yeah? Rethink, please. Yeah? If you want to count people, count them. Yeah? Why do you want to put them in these boxes which actually don't make sense to people? They are completely colonial classifications.
The competition to get the tag. The competition between various parties to get the tag.
Yeah, of course, it's related.
Assume it's neither moral or immoral. How do we explain violence which is targeted at someone because he or she is done it specific?
Yeah, good. Yeah. So let me take your question in amongst because your at a more abstract level, your question could be: there are a lot of incidents of injustice in Indian society, right? Many of which could be attributed to caste, right? They could be.
But some of them are
Well,
the reason
you say so, yeah.
Which cannot access, say, a pond because they are, they're excluded because they're.
Okay. Now, one swallow does not a summer make, right? So if you have a series of different injustices up and down this country, right? It doesn't mean that you have proved the existence of a caste system, does it? Right? What's happening right now is that the caste system comes about as an a priori explanation for everything that you've seen. So it's very convenient to put this down to caste system, that down to caste system, that down to caste system. Everything seems to be everything in Indian society and culture seems to be explainable by the caste system. Actually, our claim is exactly the opposite. You cannot explain what is happening in Indian society and culture by reference to the caste system. It doesn't mean that there is an injustice. Go and study it. Have a look at why it's happening. If it's between two jatis or something like that, try and solve the problem. Trying to find or devise methodologies according to which the problem can be solved. Fine. You don't have to accept the caste system story to do justice in those kind of situations, do you?
Sir, I have a 1 second question.
Just a supplementary to what he's saying. Just want to get the question that I asked, that while you're not denying the existence of caste, what do you mean by caste system? We use a basic question. How do you define the caste system?
Yeah, so I'm saying there is no such thing as a caste system. So the only thing I mean by the caste system is something that exists in the Western imaginations.
Yes.
And something that the Indians are simply, mantrically, copying.
Okay, that's it.
Because
Sir, 1 second question. In your discourse, are you taking caste system and jati system as synonym, or are they two different things? Caste system is one thing and jati system is another thing. Jati is there in Indian literature and up till now, but are these two terminologies or the one?
I would not use the word jati system. I would simply say jati and
Of
the
course,
existence of jatis.
Once you say jati,
yeah,
then it becomes system. But I am
no,
not
no,
going to
you don't
discuss
have to
that.
bring system into it. But I would keep caste systems and jati completely separate.
Okay, that's very good.
Right? Thank you very much. Yes, Professor Rao.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash Shah ji. In fact, no, caste system, as I understand now, it's very difficult to have any academic discussion on caste because everybody looks at caste or caste system. From the present socio-economic political level. That's how we cannot make an impartial study or understanding how they have come. One elderly gentleman was commenting on one day that caste system does not exist today. We don't have any caste system here. As a system, we don't have. We have so many political systems, economic systems, so many other systems. As you said about jati, even about caste also, there is nothing like a system. You belong to a caste. Is it just because you belong to a jati? Or is that you are following a particular occupational economic system as a part of the economic system that we don't know? And when we look into from when it has come, I think we will be rather frustrated. We can't say when it has started. Suppose for Varna, I think you can have some references from earlier ancient literature. That's okay, that we can locate it. But for Jati, again, as Sahaji said, some references are made as Jatis. Sure. That's all. There's nothing like a Jati system. And there is nothing like Varna system also. Why? Because Varna has been classification of the people based on their guna karma, about their qualities and about their work that they are going to do. So the second aspect is somehow linked to the formation of families. We don't say caste, families. Families means kula. So the origin of men is just attributed to the Gotras. Gotra is nothing like ancestry. So we are pinpointing a particular family and the ancestor, whether it's a sage or somebody, that is Gotra. Gotra doesn't mean coming from cows and all that, as it is being interpreted these days. Gotra comes from a rishi, the family of that rishi. So there is no discrimination of any caste or anything, any jati in a particular gotra. Gotra can be applied to any family pursuing any occupation, following any particular way of life. So that is gotra. So that is gotra is the lineage. And even if you go to Southeast Asia and other places, you will find the gotras. And they only believe that they worship only their ancestors. If you go to Indonesia, just if you are entering into any compound, there would be a very big a pillar, something like a pillar would be there, and there are no figures or these things, but no, they keep a lamp there. So this is only ancestral worship. Ancestral worship is almost there in almost Southeast Asian, and also if you take the American, what you call the Red Indian communities and also the Latin American countries, you will have this ancestral worship. So such kind of worship has been there, Gotras. And Gotras has been divided into small families. That is Kula. We have the reference of Kula and Gotra. So according to the Gotras, the marriages are being done. So it's not just like based on family or Kula, it is according to the Gotra. Same Gotra people are considered as sisters or brothers or something like that. That's the reason the marriage is prohibited. So one family has to marry somebody from the other Gotra. So that is the practice. So in the course of time, these systems, have been corrupted or moderated or hybrid formations that have come. So we have only Kula and Gotra, and these families have later been identified in the modern times as jatis. So these jatis are different. And such kind of, if you take the references from Mahabharata, Ramayana, you have only jatis, Pandava, and these are only Kulas. And however the Pandavas are different from the other kingly dynasties, they are not different. There is no question of discrimination. So they are all the Kshatriyas. So we have grouped them under Kshatriyas, giving them Varna system. For Varna system, we have claims. Claimants that it has been, I have given it. Who has said I have given it? It is Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He might have said that. But Krishna not as a Krishna. He did not say as a Krishna. He, in his Virat consciousness, he said the whole Purushas, according to their qualities, you can take them into some Varna. So the Varna system, if you attribute it to the ancient literature, when it is said, who said, under what circumstances it is said, has also to be understood. So this effort in the modern times we have not done that. As you said, from the 19th century onwards, we have been using this Kula, or which is wrongly or rightly translated into English as caste, whether it is from Spanish or anything else. But these Kulas have been divided. Divided in the sense that is their political strategy, and the caste system has been understood in the line of discrimination, and this discrimination has been attributed to even to the modern times. In the modern times, all political parties, all caste groups, they say that we should lead to a non-caste society. Eradication of caste system. They will be arguing about this. But all those who are enjoying reservations or any other benefits, are they not insisting for the issue of a caste certificate from the government? So politics, economics, these two are still giving the life to our casteism. So earlier it could have been their caste system. Whether it was there or it was not there, it is an academic question that we can work on that. But no, what is today is being continued. It as a casteism. It has become an ism. Everything becomes ism here. So there was also references to the time that you have also said about Buddhism and also the Bhakti movement, where they have given some references to the caste. It is not caste discrimination. They only said Buddhism, or in Jainism we also refer to Jainism, and also Bhakti movement, or our Grand Lady was also mentioning about Kabir. All these are only in the medieval period. The question has come only in the medieval period. And also right from the Mahavira times and Buddha times till almost 16th, 17th century, no thinker, theological thinker or spiritual thinker or social thinker has supported caste discrimination. Discrimination in the sense, the only question for Buddha or anybody is that all are equal before God, all have every right to reach God in his own way. It doesn't need any layers to be passed. So it is not just a 4-tier system or either 4 tiers or 5 tiers or 3 tiers originally. All these are only for social understanding, social system. But for the ultimate, I think this discrimination will not be there, should not be there. So anybody from any caste was welcome to Buddha. It was the same case with the modern medieval great persons, great personality. Everybody said, because for this there is no question of any discrimination. You can't be discriminated to reach his ultimate goal. So this has been the understanding right from the ancient times to almost the present day. Even today also you have so many gurus attracting so many lakhs of devotees. Do they belong to any particular kula? It's not like that, because this has been the same scenario even from the much ancient times, at least from the Buddha, because that is a historical period where you can quote the literature and also the archaeological sources. So that way, what Dr. Prakash has said, this is only the construct of during the colonial period. This discrimination, this caste system, which was not there earlier, that has been brought here. caste system, and also what you call the Varna system has been attached to this, make it a hybrid, legitimize it, so that the caste system, it has to be there. Brahmin should be there, and then some Mala should be there, as the Panchajanya. So like this has been almost, concentrated during the early 19th century, and also it has continued till we became independent. After becoming independent, we all know why this has been still continued, given life, and every time it is sustained and nurtured strongly, and now nobody can speak against anything against this caste system, as system in inverted commas. So this has been there, and I would be very happy to have some academic understanding on this, without emotions, without you yourself attaching to a particular kula. I think if you are discussing this, that would be an academic discussion, and I welcome such discussion forums also in ICHR, and I thank Dr. Prakash for accepting our invitation to come to us, and I also thank Dr. Sharadinduji, who brought Dr. Prakash to us, and we are very happy. I thank all those members who have attended this, because it is almost 2.5 hours. I could have taken much more time on this, because I had also been criticized much in the media. What, madam? Ritika ji?
Yes, sir.
I was also criticized for this in the media. That I gave some small write-up when some NRI student asked me some questions. Just I replied to them, and that was misquoted and misunderstood in the media, and then they have been saying that you are supporting caste system. There is no system, I say, but how can there be a caste system? How am I going to support it? So this has been made a halagulla in those days. But okay, there is no problem, because that way I am known to everybody that he is in favor of caste system.
He asked me also. He asked me how to comment on Professor.
So they have not come, they have not sought any clarification from me, but they have made it public. Okay, fine, thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, and a small gift from ACHR.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come, all of you invited to coffee, tea, please.
And my special thanks to press persons also.